all the so the plants are in relationship with all of these different microorganisms, bacteria, protozoa, fungi, and the plants, they make those sugars from, and then they're trading them for different nutrients. And then when the bacteria or, here, you got that. Okay, we got it. There we go. We do got it. Okay, so when the bacteria or fungi or protozoa get that, those sugars from the plants, which is carbon, right? Then they incorporate that into their bodies. And then like the bacteria, protozoa will eat the bacteria, and so there's that carbon cycles through all these different bodies of different living creatures in the soil. So when we think of our soil organic matter, you're probably all familiar with that term. It's something we look at on our soil tests, is what's our organic matter content of our soil. So that's not just little bits of dead plant or that's in the soil. It's also all the microbiology has the carbon that's in its bodies, but then it's also all the dead microbiology that's in the soil. There's a term for it, the necromass of the soil. So you can think of like if one little carbon molecule is going through this whole process, it's cycling through the soil from plant to bacteria to protozoa to fungi, and then, you know, maybe eventually going back up into the atmosphere. But that carbon is what all these what all the microbiology eats. So we can think of carbon as what is fueling this whole ecosystem that's down there under our feet. And when the when that organic matter in the soil and going into the different bodies of the microorganisms, it also makes these different nutrients plant available. So the plants are, you know, sucking those nutrients back up in different ways as well. So there's this whole crazy wild world, right, that's going on down below our feet in our garden. It might be all tidy on top, but down below there's a lot happening, and we want that. And we're going to do things to just like feed that. Whoops. Why is that doing that? There we go. Okay. So these are kind of the key goals that we work with. And they are disturb the soil as little as possible. Keep living plants in the soil as much as possible. Grow as many species of plants as is practical. Keep the soil covered and integrate animals. If you're following kind of the regenerative agriculture movement, these might sound familiar. They're the same. Sometimes they're, you know, worded a little differently. But these principles are basically all come down to how do we tend the soil? How do we have healthy soil? So what are the practices that we do to follow these goals and to grow our gardens? So one is we have permanent beds, whether they're raised or not. You walk in the paths and you grow things in the beds. And that's clear. And this is where we start to get into the no-till. We top dress with amendments and compost. So here we'll kind of go through a typical bed prep. On the left, here's a bed that this is early spring, and it's a bed that I had heavily mulched over the winter. I pulled the mulch off, first step. Second step, I sprinkle whatever my amendment is. I've done my soil test and I know what I need. I sprinkle that on, and then I put my compost on and I spread it out over the bed. I put my drip tape down and I'm ready to plant in. Did I miss something? Why didn't I dig that stuff in? So that's the key change. There you go. Well, now we can all go home. No, there's more. But that's basically can be one of the key changes. Is in like, you don't have to dig in your amendments, you don't have to dig in your compost. And it's partly because we have our friends up here, the earthworms, and they help us. So another practice that we use is we use a lot of mulches. So mulch is a verb, right? We mulch things and we have all these different materials that we can use as mulch. So a mulch, it's one of those like you can compost and it is compost. You can mulch and it is mulch. So, but for mulch, you can use many different things. Haylage, wood chips, leaves, grass clippings, coffee grounds, newspaper, burlap sacks, cardboard. You can buy things, paper mulch. You can, so pretty much any, you can get creative. So the purpose of mulches, and many of you probably know this, like, you know, it's putting a material on the soil surface. And what it does is it protects it from compaction of rain. So you might not think about it, but a raindrop coming from way the heck up there coming down, boom, it's actually like a lot of force. And if you have bare soil over the winter, you're going to get a lot of compaction just from rain. But if you have a mulch on there, it's protected. So it's also, if we have the sun, the mulch will protect the soil surface and keep it cool, helps with water retention, so you don't have to irrigate as much if it's mulched. And it also creates this like layer on the top of the soil. If you walk into the forest, you'll notice there's like litter on top of the soil. It's called the O horizon in the soil science world. And that O horizon is where that leaf litter and everything is right on the top of the soil surface. And it's the place where all the like decomposers, and there's like all this life that's happening there that's like breaking that material down. So you're also creating that zone in your garden where all this other creatures can do all this work for you of like breaking this material down and starting to incorporate it into the soil. And it also helps with weed control. We love that, right? So, and it's just by blocking light and smothering. So weed seeds, they're not able to germinate, and it's not perfect. Some stuff can get through, but it definitely helps. And if they do get through, they're super easy to pull out. So on here on the left, we have a bed that's overwintering, and this is what I'll often do. There's a fava cover crop that's growing up through some haylage mulch that I put on there. In the center is cabbages that are heavily mulched. And then on the right, I really love wood chips in pathways. Helps with weed control, just helps like retain moisture and keeps it tidy. And so there's in the greenhouse with some wood chip mulch. So we use a lot of transplants. I do some direct seeding, just basically, let's see, carrots, carrots, beans, radishes, sometimes arugula. But other than that, I pretty much use transplants. And the bigger, hardier transplants, the better. And that's multiple reasons for that. One of the, we want as much kind of living plants in the soil as possible. So just it does that. And also that leaf cover covers and protects the soil, so reduces weed pressure. And also we're often planting into yeah, so there's a lot of different reasons for transplants, and sometimes you get a little puppy that thinks that it should go on to get into the seedling tray, but then you train them not to do that. So another practice is to cut instead of pull finished crops. So I've got a little, hopefully this will work, a little, so this is kind of a typical bed prep. This is at the end of the season. These are like lettuce, cut and come again lettuces that were like really done. And so we're putting this bed to sleep for the winter. So you notice we just cut out that crop, we put some compost down, and then put mulch on top of it with a little bit, and you can see they're putting the crop residue back into the bed, so it can just like go back in. And we only do this if there's not any, if you have a diseased material, get it out of the garden. So, but if it's not, it's great organic matter. Okay, now let's see if I can, oh, nope. Uh-oh, how do I do, oh. Okay, phew. Okay. The next thing is a term, something that we called occultation or tarping. So occultation, if you want to sound fancy, which is sometimes fun, tarping if you just want to say it simply. So this is the use of a black plastic to cover and smother weeds or to terminate cover crops. So one of the tricky things with a no-till garden is incorporating cover crops. Because if you have this lovely stand of something in the spring, and then you're like, how am I going to turn that into my, something I'm going to plant into? So usually we would till it in, but if we're not doing that, how the heck do we do this? So this is one strategy that's really kind of come out of the whole market garden, no-till market garden world, and it works really well. So on the right, you'll see this is where I've done, it's early spring. So it takes about 4 to 6 weeks. So early spring, my cover crop was there. I cut it down and then put the black plastic on it for 4 to 6 weeks. And then you pull it back. And what has happened underneath there during that time is, it's covered, so it's protected. So all the little soil life is protected and can go to work on all that organic matter from the terminated cover crop. And it's also black, so it's warm, and it's plastic, so it's retained the moisture. So it's created this moist, warmer, protected zone for our friends, the worms, and all the soil life to do their work. So 4 to 6 weeks, we pull it off, and voila. I mean, it's kind of amazing. It's like we've got this bed that we can just plant right into. So the center picture is showing a bed that we did this. So I'll also do it just bed by bed as needed, sometimes during the growing season or yeah, depending. So here was a bed, I think there were favas that we had cut down, and then we pulled off that tarp, and you can see it looks like we could just plant right into there, which we did. And then Juno, of course, she loves to help with occultation, and she thinks tarps are the funnest thing ever, which that we just let her do. So cover crops, we love utilizing cover crops. Cover crops, they keep that living plants in the soil as much as possible, having that photosynthesis happening over the winter. We're continuing to feed that soil microbiology over the winter. And then it also, once we terminate it, it's getting incorporated into the soil. All that fertility is going into the soil. And it also creates this diversity. We can have different cover crops, and you can really play around with interesting mixes. And so on the right, left, over here, you see this is a fava cover crop that area here has just sized down. So you need something to cut it down with. It can be the scythe, the weed whacker, a lawnmower, whatever. And then after occultation, you'll see over here, this is There is the woody, kind of more woody stems of the fava beans are still there, but it actually creates this, then you can just like leave that there as a mulch and just plant right into it. So this is a tool that if you do any reading around kind of no-till gardening, you'll probably come across the broad fork, which is this tool here. And it is a tool that can be utilized for if you have compaction issues or you're transitioning, and it works by, you stand on it and it goes into the ground, and then you pull it back, and like over here, and it just like kind of opens, it does, you're not turning the soil, but it just like opens the soil, and it's pretty fun and it's pretty easy, but you don't need to go out and buy a broad fork unless you want to. And you probably all have just a regular digging fork, and that you can utilize the same way, just, you know, instead of the like, okay, now we're gonna like turn it over, you just go in, pull it back, and same concept. So you can just do that. And sometimes I'll, like if I'm planting a deep rooted crop like carrots, or a bed that just seems like it has a little bit more compaction issues, I'll broad fork or use the digging fork and just kind of open up before I put my amendments on. It just creates some like air holes to work with. So another thing of this, you know, just trying to have like diversity, plant diversity. We do a lot of interplanting. So here we've got green onions in between lettuces. And then I also have a lot of just kind of on the ends of my rows, I let a lot of like calendula and nasturtiums and amaranth and dill and, you know, just fennel and have that diversity, because I'm always thinking about like, I want pollinators, I want all, you know, I want a diversity of plants, and I also want a diversity of, you know, beneficial insects coming in. And so that I just put that picture in just to, you know, having those little spots in your garden is always good. And I forgot to say this earlier. Oh, wait. Okay, never mind. I'm going to get to where I'm supposed to say it. So again, this is, you know, practices, we don't till and we don't dig in, and that, and then all these other practices kind of support that and allow that to work. So there are some drawbacks. There's always drawbacks. Use of plastic. We want less plastic in the world. Here I'm like, go get a big, huge piece of plastic. So there are ways you can like buy used billboard covers online, or, you know, I've had cobbled together various pieces of plastic that I like use over and over and over. And it can also be more difficult to incorporate cover crops, which I kind of talked about. It can be sometimes harder to deal with if you've got a really big compaction issue. And if you like a really refined seed bed, you might not have the same refined seed bed. And then since we're utilizing compost and mulch a lot, the cost or availability of those materials, and then heavy mulches of wood chips, haylage, or straw can impede soil warming in the spring. So that can also be a drawback. So what are the benefits to these principles, to kind of working with these principles? One of the things is it really changes the structure of the soil. So when we talk about tilth, or you've all heard that term before, tilth refers to the structure of the soil and the crumbly, you know, we want our soil to be this dark brown, crumbly material, and like in the picture here, and those kind of crumbles are from in soil world, they're called aggregates. And it's like this aggregate formation. And our little friends, the microbiology that are hard at work. So they are down there and they exude these different glues, and they're actually binding together the different, sand, silt, and clay particles that is the kind of parent material that the soils are formed from. But it's the biology that forms the structure. The biology glues these different particles together in different ways, forming aggregates. And in this picture, we have, ones that we can see. But if you take a little teeny bit of that and you put it under a microscope, you're going to see the same form. So there's like macro aggregates all the way down to micro aggregates. It's really kind of a fractal structure that happens, these same patterns that are repeating and repeating in the soil. And what happens with that is these aggregates, then they form spaces in between them, right? It's not just, unless we have compaction, then we don't have those spaces. That's why we don't want compaction, because in those spaces, we have air and water. So the soil is breathing, right? It's like it's breathing, and there's water that is going into those pore spaces. And so that brings us to this other benefit where we have increased drought resilience and water holding capacity in soils with this good structure, because it's almost, you can think like a sponge, right? A sponge has a similar kind of structure with all these holes in it, and that can hold, suck up and hold onto a lot of water, and it can also release it. So the soil does the same thing. Hopefully, that's what we want. And yeah, so in this picture, all the blue is water, and then there's spaces, and then there's also, just all the different particles of the soil and aggregates there. So soil organic matter, so that, we can kind of think, we can really think interchangeably about carbon and soil and organic matter. And the organic matter is it's what's feeding all the microbiology, and so increasing that soil organic matter is going to also have beneficial aspects on the structure and the water holding capacity, and it's going to be storing more carbon. So one of the things that they're finding about carbon, like when we hear about carbon sequestration in the soil, is that those carbon molecules are often in those little aggregates. You can get, they can get sequestered in a little aggregate, and then the microbiology can't get to it, so they can't eat it. So we want the flow of carbon through the soil, but kind of from a, and this is kind of more larger scale, but we can also do it in our little plots of like, can we sequester more carbon in the soil? And we can, and part of, like, when we till, part of what happens is we break up all of that structure. And so it's also releasing all these little bits of carbon that have just been held in a little aggregate somewhere. There, all of a sudden that aggregate's broken up, and that's part of why we have that just burst of microbial activity after we dig or we till, is that we're breaking up some of the structure and then we're making things available. So it's this weird balance of flow of having carbon available, but also having some of it's tucked away. So it also, these practices I find really reduce weed pressure. I spend a lot less time weeding, which, I'm fine with. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, top dressing with compost. Compost, good compost should not have any viable weed seeds, should not have any viable seeds in it. They should all be not viable. So we're putting on the top of our beds this, kind of clean material, and then we're not allowing, since we're not digging or tilling, anytime we dig or till, we open up the weed seed bank to the possibility of germination, right? Because in any soil, there's a weed seed bank, it's there. And so every time you bring new soil up to the surface, you're bringing new seeds up to the surface, and they're like, oh, thank you. Now I have like some moisture, and so, here we go. And so we're continually trying to get the weed seed bank in that top layer to germinate and get rid of it. And so after a while, you really start to just reduce your weed pressure from that weed seed bank in the soil in your beds that you're working with. There's always going to be weeds with birds, bringing stuff in, and just the pathways. And, there's always those little corner edge areas that are tricky. But between not tilling, using compost, using mulches, and then when we occultate, we can also use occultation during the growing season. Like if you have a bed and you're like, I want to plant carrots here. And carrots, it's like you really want a clean seed bed because they're like terrible to weed. And so if you use occultation in that bed before you plant your carrots, if there's any weed seeds in there, they will germinate, start to grow under that black plastic, not have any light, and die. And so you kind of get that germination out of the way, and then you can come in and plant your carrots. So we have reduced weed pressure, and we have increased earthworm populations. So earthworms are super cool. They are, there's different kinds. There's the big guys that go up and down in the soil profile. There's smaller ones that go lateral in the soil profile, and they're building these burrows. And these burrows are actually, if you don't dig them up or till them up, they exist for years, and multiple generations of worms reuse the same burrows. And they're also utilized by plant roots, and just create more kind of that kind of porosity in the soil that water can go into, air can go into. And so and then the earthworms, not only are they creating these cool burrows, but they're constantly, their thing is they go up to the surface of the soil and they get some organic matter and they bring it down into their burrows. So that's how we get our cover crops incorporated into our soil, is those worms are working for us. And it's amazing just the amount of earthworms that I have in the garden now. It's really different from when I was tilling, even though I didn't till that much. When you think about it, here's these creatures who are working really hard and building their homes and building their whole world. And then if you come in every year and rip it up, then it's like, they're like, oh, we got to rebuild again. And then, oh, we got to rebuild again. And so instead they just get to do their thing and not put all their energy into rebuilding. So stable housing for the earthworms is what we're doing. So the other benefit, we kind of talked a lot about this, just, that whole soil food web, it just increases the complexity of that system. And, just like anytime we have a natural system where it complexifies, there's just results happen that you don't expect. And so that's what I just think, the more that I can have the soil in my garden be this complex ecosystem that I can feed in, then, the plants are going to have so much more kind of available for them as far as relationships and nutrients. So, and it is just with the weeding, and I find it just easier and less time consuming. It's definitely still a garden, so it's still some work. But we spend most of our time planting and harvesting. And that's what it's like, you know, you still have to harvest, so, and get those plants in the ground. So, okay, so if you're like, well, this sounds good, but how do I get started? Conversion processes. So if you're starting with sod, you're like, I want to convert this sod. So mow it really short, get that organic matter down, and then till. See, we can't be, nothing's like, I guess, yeah, tillage still has its place. So, and if you want to be like really strict about it and not till, you're going to have to do the next step for longer. So, yeah, when I'm converting new ground, I till it, and then I do occultation for 6 months. If you're starting with sod and you don't want to till, I'd mow and I'd put a tarp on there for a year. Especially if you have a lot of quack grass. Quack grass takes at least 6 months, I mean, at least a year to kill under black plastic. And that's the other place that I will dig, is if I see quack grass, I will get my digging fork and I will dig every little bit out of there, and I don't care what I'm disturbing. So, so after we do our occultation, we'll form our beds. And here you can see, like, the first slide picture here is this ground was, we tilled it. And then the next slide is we formed the beds, and then mulch the paths, which we haven't done yet in that picture. And then if you're converting new ground, applying 4 to 6 inches of compost on the bed, and then you can just plant right into it and go from there. If you have an existing garden and you're wanting to kind of shift things over, and you can do this row by row, it can just be like, I'm going to do a little experiment here. Get some black plastic down on that row for 4 to 6 weeks, or, you know, if there's something in there, cut it down, occultate, and then mulch your paths and apply compost and see what happens. So if we're planting and crop termination, so if we have a bed and we have like lettuce in it, or let's say we have brassicas in it. So this is a brassica, this picture here, and you can kind of see, like, okay, we have our brassica, but what's going down below? So instead of pulling that plant up and, you know, with it a whole bunch of soil that we're like exporting out of the garden, we come in and we just cut it right below the soil surface. And you're going to want some kind of, I have loppers that are like, these are my sacrificial loppers, and I just use them because they're going to get dull because you're in the soil. So cut it right below the soil surface, and then we leave all those roots in the ground, and they decompose and they're feeding the soil life. And then if I have a bed and I've cut out the crop, I'll do just a little quick hoe. If there's any weed seedlings, want to get them out of there. And then top dress with any fertilizer if needed. And then once you're going, at this point, I do like a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch top dressing of compost. Just continual little feeding. And then put in transplants. If there's crop residue, yeah, you can leave it on there sometimes, and it can act as a mulch. And brassicas do create, and corn also creates these stumps, which are kind of a little pain in the butt, but you can just work around them. And then, yeah, mulch if needed. And then if I'm direct seeding, I'll rake any mulch off the top or crop residue and then just direct seed in. So you probably don't need to get any tools, but tools are fun. So these are my favorite tools. The hori, the kind of garden knife. I use that for transplants. Bloop. Bloop. And then this right here is my favorite hoe, just a sharp diamond hoe. I use that if there's any I use that for weed control in the paths and the edges, and in a bed before planting if there's any weeds. And then something to chop down your cover crops if you're using cover crops. And I already said the kind of sacrificial subsoil blade or loppers. Oh, and a hard rake to rake in your compost. And then yeah, transition, I talked about broad fork and digging fork. So if you are interested in pursuing this subject more, there are some resources. I just want to, you're probably familiar with Charles Dowding. He's out of the UK, and he has, he's the resource that's the most kind of home garden oriented. The rest of them are more kind of market garden oriented, but there is a lot of really great information and innovation that's kind of coming out of the no-till market garden world, and no-till growers, their like website, podcast, and is probably one of the big resources. And then I think actually I didn't put this on, I think it is maybe not on your handout, but if you want to dive into the microbiology more, the Teaming with Microbes by Jeff Lowenthal is a great book to do that with. So with that, thank you, and let's have questions. Oh,
folks on the Zoom call, we're going to ask folks to ask questions with the mic.
Hey, Zoomies.
Hey, I'd love to know how you handle slugs in your deep mulch garden.
Oh, yeah.
What's your secret?
Yeah, slugs can be an issue. And I don't mulch everything. So I don't mulch my lettuce, so I choose what I mulch in part so that we can have, yeah, so I mulch the things that need it. And if it's a slug heavy time of year or a crop that is really susceptible, I definitely don't use mulch. And then I do occasionally go out there with my headlamp at night and like pick all the slugs off and put them in the freezer. I don't know, it's the easiest way I've found to kill them. And then you find them there and they're like, so the question was about following up on slugs and the use of diatomaceous earth. I actually have not used diatomaceous earth for slugs. I've heard about, but I don't. Yeah, I use Sluggo. Actually, that's the other thing. I will use Sluggo if there's Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know, not that I know of. I mean, I'm sure that, plastic is plastic. And so I guess that's one of the drawbacks, but I don't know of any studies or anything that have, I'm sure there's molecules move, but yeah, I don't know. And I don't worry about it. But maybe I should start.
How about like strawberry beds? What do you do for those?
For strawberry beds, I have the strawberry bed that I have them planted in black plastic, similar to how would see over at Crowfoot when they were, yeah, just you can take the weed cloth and burn little holes in it and then plant in. So that's what I have for strawberry bed.
Let your mulch meet and then
Yeah, and black plastic is also a mulch, and it is kind of amazing, like, if you have it down and then pull it up, there's often just like a ton of worms and that one picture that I showed that had all the worms on it, that was a place where I had pulled the black plastic up and that's what I found. So I kind of am like, well, they seem to like it. So it does create that same protection and, you know, and kind of microenvironment underneath that's protected and stays more moist. So, yeah.
Hi, I have a big grass mound, but I have not used it for compost or for the top mulch because I'm afraid of weed seeds.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe if I put it on and then put black plastic on top.
Yeah, is it like cut grass, like lawn?
Right.
Yeah, so if it's grass clipping, if it's from lawn that's cut before anything's gone to seed,
Right.
you should be fine. And maybe there's a little bit. And that's where, or you can like have it and let it rot down a bit and then utilize it. So that's like you saw in a lot of the pictures, it looks like hay, but that's why I utilize haylage instead of hay, because haylage is the big bales that are wrapped in white plastic. It's a fermentation process and it kills the weed seeds. So, you know, using haylage or straw, or if you have hay, and spent hay can be a great resource, but you're going to want to let it kind of rot down. And just for that purpose, to like get rid of those weed seeds, using fresh hay in your garden, you're just going to be importing all these weed seeds. And so don't do that. But grass clippings, you know, especially in the early spring, like all those grass clippings will be fine. It's just later in the season, there's seed heads, then yeah.
My other question is irrigation.
Mhm.
I noticed you had the big round irrigation. I know Susan Bill uses the
Tape,
tape.
yeah, it was tape.
Oh, it was tape.
Yeah, and like, oh, there may have been one in the hoop house. I have the round, but I use tape in pretty much everything except for this one section.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Could you go through the list again of what you feel we should use starts versus direct seeding?
Okay, yeah. So, I guess I pretty much use starts for everything except for carrots, radishes, what did I say? Beans, and then sometimes I'll transplant beans, but I'll often direct seed. And then sometimes I'll direct seed peas, but I go back and forth with peas and beans. But carrots, some arugula, sometimes I'll direct seed. There are some things that I'll broadcast direct seed. I'll sometimes do that also with Mizuna, like some of those like smaller tender greens. I will direct seed. But other than that, I do a lot of starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is with regard
Oh.
to cover crops. And cover crops, is it possible still at this point of the year? I mean, I realize that fall would be better, but
As far as planting them.
yeah.
Yeah. So this time of year, I mean, we're coming right up on, you know, kind of early February, I think Candlemas, the early February is when the light starts to get enough that we can start to kind of get early germination. So, and as far as a cover crop, but it's still going to be cold. So what would I put in right now? I love favas, and they are kind of amazing with their germination. I mean, I planted some in like end of November. It was, and they like came up I'm like, wow. And then some of the spring planted grain cover crops, like that could work. And and then there are cover crops that, you know, for the summer, like buckwheat, and I love doing Lacey Facelia and alyssum, and then in the fall, planting, you know, they're always best if you get them in before fall equinox, but I find things germinate and they might not be as vigorous, but they do fine if you get them in October. So, because it's often like stuff's in the bed, I've got crops in there, I'm not gonna take it out to get in a cover crop. Sandy.
Question? Am I next?
Oh, sorry, there's two mics. I'm getting, that's why I was like,
Okay.
where?
So it's very basic. A garden that has beds that have not been taken care of for a couple of years,
Mhm.
very impacted, full of weeds and plants that have been
Mhm.
growing
Mhm.
and going to seed and
Mhm.
onions and this and that, remains of chard and all kinds of stuff in there. And I would like to try to prepare at least a bed. I have
Mhm.
use of a bed
Mhm.
to, you know, and be able to plant something this for this coming fall or this coming year
Mhm.
or this spring even. And what would be the suggestion? And
Yeah, it would be the same process. I'd like go home and cut everything down
cut
and
it
just cut everything,
And
get a
then
weed
till-
whacker.
until
Well, I don't know. It's an existing garden bed, right?
it's an existing garden.
Okay, I would just cut everything down like as close to the soil surface as you can. And then get some black plastic on there and then just, and wait until it's like planting time, like, and since there's so much going, like maybe give it 2 months,
Okay.
right? It's like
Okay.
almost every, yeah, and then you'll like, yeah, and then pull it off. And if you have some bigger material, it might not have broken down as well. So then you can just like take the bigger stuff that hasn't decomposed as much that's in your way, get that out of there. And you might have, you know, with that, and then get some compost on there. And part of that, like why we use like a lot of compost that first round is it's going to be suppressing and smothering that weed seed bank that's in that soil. So it's going to give you a head start to, like, when you plant into it, you're not going to be dealing with as much weed pressure as if you just did the occultation and then just planted without the compost. So that's where it can be helpful.
And a following connected question is, if I don't have compost that I've been able to prepare, is there a good choice of purchase? You, I mean, where do I get?
Well, there's a place on the island called Midnight's Farm that sells compost. And then there are other places to get it as well, which I'm not as familiar with. Yeah, so yeah. And Scott Myers also sells it, and then there are some folks that truck it in from off island that you can also get it from. So there are options.
Faith, thank you very much.
You're
It's been great to be here. But I want to talk about black plastic and how all plastic is not created equal.
Mm.
And I think maybe you're using it interchangeably. Like I'd hate to see people go off to Sunset and get a bunch of 6 mil black plastic and start laying it down because garden's gonna fill up with microplastics. It's gonna break down in UV and all of that. So would you like to differentiate between that and say like a heavy duty road cloth, you know, that black
Okay.
road cloth that will last people for many, many years and won't break down as quickly?
That is a,
And maybe could be for sale at the next plant sale. And people
oh,
would measure their beds and order it, you know.
there you go. Yeah. So that is a really good point, Sandy. Thank you for bringing that up. So, yeah, so the road fabric is what I utilize a lot for, especially bed by bed tarping. And it is, I actually have some down that's just down all the time through the kind of central path in my garden, and it has been there for I don't know, 7 years or something. So it's super durable and you can just use it over and over. And then the thicker plastic or the not road fabric, what's used mainly in the kind of market garden world are old silage tarps, and you can buy them online. Farmer's Friend is a great, they sell all kinds of supplies, so you can buy silage tarps. There's also online resources to buy old billboards, and that is also a durable plastic that you can utilize over and over again. And I can't remember like the number, what millimeter or the plastic is, but I can look that up and get it to you.
We've always heard.
So thanks for bringing that up, Sandy. Anyone else? And are there
Question
questions online?
Online, yep. So from Heike Dubner, we've got a lot of local and commercial compost, as much uncomposed or undecomposed wood. Do you let your compost sit in a few years before using it?
Okay, yes, I should have talked to. So wood chips are like, or the decomposed wood. So there's a real difference between sawdust and wood chips, and it's really about surface area, right? So that is one material. I would not use sawdust as a mulch material because it's going to tie up more nitrogen. I don't worry about wood chips in the garden. I use them in the paths. I sometimes also use them as mulch on top of the garden beds. Like I'll do that sometimes for garlic or, the reason I don't worry about it is, and as some of you know, our compost has, it's woodier than, it has some woody material in it. And I actually really like that. And the reason I like that is those larger wood pieces are slow release carbon for the microbiology. So they're often stay on top of the soil surface, but if they do kind of get incorporated in a bit, they're, because they have less surface area per volume, it's just that outside of it that is going to be, the microbiology will be eating at. So it's actually having larger woody chips in your garden system is not really a problem. We actually have a really good friend of ours who's a big grower over on the east side, thousands of acres of cropland and orchards. And he's been doing all these experiments where he's actually tilling in wood chips into these cropping systems and having really great results. And so we've been talking with him. We want to try and do some experiments around it. So I don't worry about woody, kind of bigger wood chip, woody material in my garden system. I bring it in and I put it in the pathways, and I like it that as the compost breaks down and gets incorporated into the soil, it is left with some larger pieces on the soil surface, and that actually acts as this mulch. And then if I'm going to direct seed or something, I just rake them out of the way and direct seed in, or otherwise they're not in the way at all. So, and I've also used wood chips for, I didn't go into this in the slideshow, but conversion process. So a section of garden that I wanted to change, or that was not garden, I wanted to change it into garden. I put 6 inches of wood chips on there, and in the fall, in the spring, I dug little holes, planted squash in there. And then the next season, just formed beds, planted potatoes. And then the next season I grew corn. And so it was from the 6 inches of wood chips that were slowly being decomposed into the soil. And what I find with like, and I did this other experiment where I had this zone, I did half wood chips, half haylage, thick mulch, similar kind of process. And it was really interesting. I set it up in the fall. In the spring, when I looked at the soil, the soil under the wood chips had more worms and was softer than the soil that was under the haylage mulch. So I don't know, I'm a fan of wood chips, so. Are there more questions? I'm also kind of aware that I think we're at kind of time. Yeah, so, it does have, I use both permeable because the road fabric is permeable to water. And then I also have old silage tarps which are not permeable to water. So sometimes like in a really like this last spring that was so wet, having an impermeable tarp was really beneficial. Whereas, and it also, if you're using it as, to kill quackgrass, it has to be impermeable. If you use like a water permeable plastic to kill quackgrass, you won't kill it. So you can use both. Are we good? Cool. Well, thank you all. This has really been delightful.
Seriously, in the face on the word cool.